Alright, so in this video we'll have a look at how to add tables and forms to our website. So let's get started. We'll first add a table, the tag for which, as you might have guessed, is the table tag. Now in HTML what happens is that each table has only a given number of rows. Okay, there is no concept of a column in HTML for adding a table. So what we do is we add a row and then we add all the number of elements we want for that particular row. So the number of elements inside each table row makes the number of columns. Okay, so you might not understand this just yet, but just follow along. By the end of this video you will understand what I mean. So for adding a table row we have the tr tag, which is again pretty appropriate, and inside the tr tag we have something called as a td or a table data. Okay, so the number of td tags here determine the number of columns in the table. For example, if I want to have say 3 columns, so I'll add 3 table data tags here. So I copy this and I paste it 2 more times. So now I have one table which has one row, and that row has 3 data elements, which in other words means I have a table with 1 row and 3 columns. Okay, so let me just add a sample data here. So I'll say 1 1 1 2 and 1 3, which will make it easier for us to understand. So now let me save this and I'll go and run it. So now we have 1 1 1 2 1 3. It appears in the form of a table. When you select it, you see that it is indeed in the form of a table. However, the border is not visible because we haven't set the border attribute here. So we'll go and write the border attribute to 1. So the border equal to 1 will give us a table border here. So now when we refresh this, we see that we get this white black border. To style the border we'll require CSS, which we'll be looking at after a while. So right now what we have is we have one table row which has 3 data elements. In other words, one row with 3 columns. To give the heading of the table we have something called as a caption. So we'll use the caption tag, which is again a double tag. So the opening tag here and the closing tag here, and here in the middle we'll have the heading of the table. So I'll just write heading of the table and I'll save it. So we have the heading of the table. As you can see, it is centered to fit the table's width, and that is how you add a heading to a table. So now for adding more rows to the table, let me quickly copy this and paste this a couple times. So here I'll make 2 1 2 2 2 3 to distinguish it from the first row, and here I'll write 3 1 3 2 and 3 3. So there we go, we have a we have a proper table made here. Now the point here is that instead of adding normal numbers to a table data, you can add almost anything, including images and audio. Right, so there is no limit to what kind of data you can add to a table. So every element which we have learned before can be added as a table data. You only need to ensure that it is between these td tags. Right, so that is everything you need to know about a table. So go ahead, make a table, add all your elements, probably make a list of the books you like with all the posters in the table or something. So as you might know that a form contains a lot of different kinds of fields. There are multiple types of inputs, then there are buttons to submit the form, reset the form and everything. So we'll have a look at all of these one by one. So let's get started. The common tag or the aggregator tag here is the form tag, which contains everything that is there in the form. Right, so everything that is a part of the form has to be mentioned inside this particular form tag. Now to begin with, let me quickly create an input tag here. So an input tag is a single tag, as you can see, and there are different types of inputs available, which is specified using the type attribute. For example, if you are asking for the name of the user, which is a text data, so we'll name the type as text. So now when we save this and we try to run this form, we get this white blank input box wherein you can add any kind of text. Right, so that is the first and most common type of input. The second commonly used type of input is something called as number, which is basically used to take in the age or things like that. Right, so when you go for a number input tag, you get these arrow buttons here, which basically increase and decrease the values when you click on them once. So also you can manually add any number which you want here. So that is input is equal to number for you. Now when we need to specify what we are asking them for, we can do that here, right? For example, I can say enter your name or just name. So notice that we do it outside the input tags but inside the form tag, right? So that basically names that particular button or that particular box whatever we want it to. So the user will see that name, so they'll have to enter the name here. Similarly, they'll enter the age here, right? To bring it onto the next line, we'll again use the line break if you want. So now the form, these two boxes will come down to separate lines. Okay, the third category or the third kind of input which is used is something called as radio. Now you might know that a radio button is basically something which the user can select only one of it, right? Those circles with dots, if you remember. So we'll just say gender here, because gender is something which user has to select from a given choice and they can select only one value, right? So now again I'll add a line break here and I'll add input type is equal to radio, and let me copy this and paste it again so that we have two different choices. So now you see we get these little boxes or circles with dots inside them. So those are called the radio buttons. And to make sure that we get to choose only one of it, because right now we can choose both of them, what we do is we name them and both of the names are the same, right? So basically the logic is to give a common name to both these inputs. So for example, if I say gender, I'll name the second one also as gender, because a user cannot select multiple values having the same name, right? So if I say male here and I say female here, so what happens is that the user can only select either one of those, either male or female. So notice that if we give a different name here, for example if I call it gender 2, the user can still select both of these because the names are still different, right? So to ensure that the user gets to select only one of those, we need to make sure that the names of all the options or all the radio input types is the same. The fourth category is something called as a checkbox. That square with the tick inside it? Yeah, that's the checkbox for you. So a checkbox is something which is used to pick whatever the user wants, right? There is no limit to it. The user can select none of them, the user can select one of them, or the user can select all of those, right? So there is no particular numbering limit as to how many boxes the user can tick, and that is done by input type is equal to, yes, you get the checkbox. So let me copy this, paste it a couple times, and I'll just say ABC to avoid confusion. A, B and C, right? So now when we run this, we see that the user gets to these boxes, and it is up to the user to select either one of these, any one of these, two of these, or all of these. Okay, there is no limit to that because it is a checkbox. So these are the four most commonly used input types. There is another input type which is a drop down menu, right? So that is something which is done with the help of the select tag. I have to give them the credit for the names. The names are pretty appropriate. You get to select one of it from a list of options. So yeah, there we go. The select tag is something which actually makes that thing drop down, and the options are the options available inside the drop down. So for instance, if we ask the user to choose a city, and I won't forget to put a line break here this time, right? So now when we ask the user to choose a city, we give them three options. Let's say Nagpur, we say Pune, and we say Mumbai, right? So now what happens is the user gets this drop down wherein they can select any one of these options, right? So that is what the select tag does, and these options are the ones which are displayed in the list. So now that we are done with almost all the possible input types, the ones which are used most frequently, we move on to the buttons. So now there are different kinds of buttons. One is a button which you can do anything with, right? For example, you can add your own custom code to it. Another one is something called as a submit button, which is used to send in the values or store the values of the form. The third one is something called as a reset button, which is used to clear all the fields which you have selected, right? So there are two ways for adding buttons. The first one is input type is equal to button, and here we get to write the value of the button which is to be displayed. So if I want a submit button, I'll say submit, or if I want any other name, I can write that here. So when you save this and run this, we get the submit button here. So notice that when I click on the submit button, nothing happens because the type I mentioned is button. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll copy this, paste this, and I'll change the type from button to submit. So the submit basically makes the button specifically for submitting the values. So now the second one is the one which has the type as submit, and when I click on the second one, notice what happens here. Okay, so when I click on the submit one, you see that something changes here, which is basically the code trying to store the data or connect to the server for doing that. But since we are running it on the local server for now, that won't happen, right? So this is the second category of button, or the second type of button. The third one, as I mentioned, is the reset button. So that goes by the name reset again, and I'll mention reset here. So before we actually use the reset button, let me quickly fill in a couple values here. So I'll just randomly type anything, and okay, gender is male, I'll select B here. Nagpur seems fine to me. Now when I click on reset, you see that everything clears out, right? So that is what the reset button is used for. Now let me quickly add a line break, and now what we'll do is we'll basically try to segregate this form or make it look neater. So for that we need something called as a field set tag. Okay, so we use a field set tag to basically combine one particular information or one particular category of information used in a form. What I mean is that you see this particular piece of the form is covered in this box, right? So that is what a field set does. It sets this particular information inside this box. Now to label the field set, we use something called as a legend. Okay, so the legend basically appears on the top of the box. You will see what I mean in just a second. So I'll call it personal information. Okay, a few typos here and there, doesn't matter. So when I refresh it, you get this, it is displayed on top of the rectangle, which basically segregate this particular portion of the form. Now what I'll do is I'll copy the entire field set and I'll paste it again, and let's call it official information for now. So what I'm basically trying to say here is that we can divide the form based on the category of information or the type of information asked using the field sets and the legend. Okay, so now we have divided this one common form into two different things. One stands for the personal information, the second for the official information. The whole purpose of doing this is that it makes the form appear better in a way, because the user is not confused about which information is to be entered where, right? So that is what the field set and legend is used for, and that is almost everything that you guys need to know about adding a basic form.